I'm not usually one for I told you so's, but in this case, I think it's pretty much warranted, Honey said quietly as she and Ulrich looked through the burnt out barn, flashlights at the ready. Just because we don't see any exacts doesn't mean that they aren't here, Ulrich said defensively. They could be camouflaged, or give off a pheromone that makes them invisible to a million eyes. Ollie, I'm looking at the live feed from my camera. There's no egg sacs, Honey said, listening to each creak and groan from the structure. Using a stick she found, she started poking around at a set of grimy assorted fabrics and faded blue tarp. I think this is where they've been sleeping, Honey said aloud. They made a nest? Perhaps they're part avian. Are there any feathers? Ulrich asked, excited. No. Look. Honey shined her light on a dark red spot on the ground. Red smudges were leading away from the pile and out the doorway that was sans a door. That looks like it could be blood, Ulrich said, stepping forward to stand next to Honey. Excellent! Some samples to test! The excitable wolf got to work, using some swabs to collect from the presumed blood spots. So, they're injured, Honey said quietly. Maybe. And look where they're going! Without a thought, Ulrich jogged out the door, tugging the bad samples into his portable kit, which was set up similarly to his official CSI one. Honey started to follow, pulling out her phone. Ollie, wait, she said. We need to call your dad. Ollie stopped in his tracks and turned to look at his girlfriend, whining a little. But honey, he'll try to stop us, and we're so close. Ollie, Honey said, looking him in the eyes. They're hurt. That means they could be someone who needs help, or a mysterious entity that's now hurt, agitated, and therefore dangerous. We need to let your father know. But, but, oh, fine, Ulrich said, whipping his phone out. He tapped on the screen for a couple of minutes before putting it away. Okay, I told him. Now, let's go, before the trail goes cold. Wait, what exactly did you tell your dad? Honey asked. Back at the ranch. I don't know what it's supposed to mean, Dorian said. He was currently looking at his phone, having pulled it out while talking to Yuri and Malcolm. The two and their mates were visiting. You know how your brother is. I'll read it again for y'all. You cannot rule out egg sacs due to the pheromones or camouflage. The blood is fresh and old. But don't worry. Lots of samples have been collected. We're in pursuit. Xavier blinked a few times while Yuri just scratched his head. So, Ollie's been off his meds for a while now, right? Maybe he's remembering a nightmare again, Xavier offered, before Dorian received another notification of a text. This one's from Honey, he said before reading it. Ulrich and I have been tracking someone, possibly a homeless mammal or cat squatch. They've been sleeping in an old partially burnt out barn. We found blood and are following the trail and scent. They might be hurt. We're currently traveling west along a creek. Please send help. Dorian looked at the text twice before reading it aloud again. Not wasting a moment, he pointed to the black wolf. Yuri, go get Ada and let her know what's happening. I'll call up your brother and Van and rope them in as well. That barn's the old Hobson's property, and right about now on their patrol they should be right around where the creek meets the river. They can help backtrack. Xavier, go let your ma know what's happening. The older white wall wolf didn't have to repeat himself. His sons bolted to do as they were told, knowing the situation was a serious one.
It might be a wild goose chase, but we still can't take that chance,"
he said softly to himself before making his way to his cruiser and getting on the radio. In the northern Meadowland. Okay, I just got a text from your dad, Honey said as she jogged to keep up with an increasingly excited Ulrich. And he told us he's on the way with backup, and that we're to back off. Look! Ulrich said, not having been listening. Honey looked through a clearing and saw a figure. From the distance that they were from them, it was hard to determine their height. She saw a shock of shaggy brown fur trailing down from the figure's head to just past their shoulders. They turned and looked behind them, and she saw a pale, furless face. They seemed frightened and started to move faster, clearly limping. Honey immediately thought back to Vernon and Dawn's cubs, specifically to their youngest mystery mammal. They might be the same species as Lily, she said, not noticing Ulrich's ears twitching. Agreed, which means that the underground lizard people have targeted Vernon, clearly because you and I are getting too close, was Ulrich's response. Before Honey could respond, he took off. Oh my god. Ollie, wait! She called, chasing after her mate. They were still following the creek bed when they heard a loud yelp, followed almost immediately by a pained howl. They burst through some bushes to find the mammal they had been chasing in a ditch, backed up to an old and gnarled tree. The mammal was panting hard and scooting back as quickly as they could from Vanna, the large tigress with both paws held out in front of her. Zack was right by her side, his paw resting on the butt of his trank gun. Both were looking at the unknown mammal with wide eyes. Neither took their eyes off the mammal, but were still aware of Ulrich and Honey's appearance on the scene. I already let Papa Hunter know where we are, and we're not too far from the main road into town. Sure enough, it wasn't too much longer before Dorian stepped through the trees, stopping when he got a look at the mammal who was now whimpering in pain and fear, looking around at the growing number of mammals with wide eyes. Yuri and Ada were right behind, the black wolf and hyena looking at the scene in mild shock. Huh. Guess I owe Xavier $20 that Ollie wasn't just chasing another ostrich, and another 30 since he doesn't have his head stuck in a tree again, Yuri snorted with a smirk, before a paw swatted him on the back of the head. Hush now, Yuri, Audrey said, scolding her son. Now ain't the time or place for that. When we get home, we can discuss what you now owe to who. For now, go on over to your brother and make sure he doesn't do anything rash. Yuri grumbled but complied, making his way over to Yorick, giving the mammal in the ditch a wide berth. Ada and Audrey went to stand next to Dorian, everyone present having any possible escape route blocked off. The mammal looked around, still panting out of breath, coming to that very conclusion. Just as Vanna started to calmly speak to the terrified mammal, their eyes started to water, and their shoulders began to hitch. Please, a small and slightly rasping voice croaked out. All eyes were on the mammal, tears streaming down their face as they tried to hold back a sob. Please, don't kill me. The voice sounded like a child's. Dorian, getting a closer look, took in the sight of a mammal, and, based on the limited knowledge of this species from knowing his granddaughter, to the best of his ability, Dorian determined that this was a child. Their hair was long and brown, unkempt and with clumps. Like Lily, aside from the fur on their head and their eyebrows, they were otherwise furless. They were wearing a large coat, much too large for themselves. It was dirty and torn, but appeared to be some kind of long navy blue coat with copper buttons. The pants were what he guessed to be black ones, but were caked in mud and dirt. The pant leg was cut, with blood leaking out. The child looked up at Dorian pleadingly, the law wolf filing away that their left eye was brown, and their right eye was bright green. Please, just let me go. Oh, Audrey said under her breath, also realizing that they were looking at a child, her heart immediately hurting at the state of them. We can't do that, kiddo.
You're out here, all alone and hurt. We just want to help you.
Dorian said calmly and softly. He noted how confused the child seemed to be, and how they shrank back when he took a step forward. They started breathing faster, and that was when Ada stepped into the ditch. The hyena flashed them a smile, not showing her teeth, just walking slowly forwards. Hiya, my name's Ada. What's yours? Ada asked. The child looked confused again, possibly from her bark's accent, and looked around, as though to make sure no one else was approaching, and only seeming mildly relieved at that. Marcus. So, this is a boy then. Aside from size, not too much difference from Lily, Dorian thought to himself. Well, it's nice to meet you, Mr. Marcus, Ada continued on, coming to a similar conclusion as Dorian. I'm just a registered nurse, and I was hoping to get a look at that leg of yours. That be okay? Ada stopped walking forward, her paws open, showing just the first aid kit she had on paw. You, you're not gonna kill me? Marcus asked, his voice tapering off with a whimper. Nah, Ada said with a wave of her paw. It's kinda the opposite of my job. Marcus whined when he scooted back again, using his bad leg. He let out a gasp and nodded. Okay. Ada gave him her brightest smile and lightly stepped towards him, getting to work right away. There's a nasty gash you got there. It's probably gonna need some stitches. But also, the skin here's looking a little inflamed. I think that might be a mild infection, Ada said after she gently tore open the hole around the wound and cleaned it. She apologized when she had to use the rubbing alcohol, making Marcus wince and hiss. She soon had the wound bandaged and wrapped up in gauze to the best of her ability. You're gonna have to go to the hospital, kiddo, she said. At the mention of a hospital, he started to scramble away the best he could, hurting his already injured leg, making him yelp again. Whoa, calm down there, Ada said, soft but a bit more firm. Please, don't dissect me, Marcus pleaded, the tears streaming down his face. No one's gonna dissect ya, buddy, Ada said. Up outside the ditch, Ulrich starting to become more frantic. But we gotta learn about their species, he said, before Yuri tackled him, clamping a paw around his muzzle. Shut your yap, Yuri hissed to his brother, who was still squirming and now whining. The entire display further distressed the boy. Marcus, look at me, Ada said. Her tone was serious, and she was looking at the child in his mismatched, colored eyes. Marcus stopped his movement as he looked at her, his breathing still fast. I promise you, no one is gonna dissect you or hurt you. I'm not gonna let that happen. No one here is gonna let that happen. Even the wolf that my monkey's pinning down to the ground ain't gonna do nothing to you. The sheriff was telling the truth. We just want to help you. Ada had moved closer, not caring about her jeans getting muddy, and as she slowly took the strange mammal's paw in her own, never once breaking eye contact. She could see in his eyes the fear, but also the flame of hope. She read in him that he wanted desperately to believe her, and after a tense minute, she watched as he let out a shuddered breath and gave the slightest of nods. Promise? He asked, his voice near a whisper. Promise, Ada said, smiling. A little while later, at the Northern Meadowland Hospital. It's good that you brought him in when you did, Sheriff, Dr. Katzen said, the large lynx speaking softly out in the hall to the law wolf. That gash on his leg was definitively inflamed and very close to becoming outright infected. That, combined with his living conditions and his malnourishment, could have ended up costing him his leg, assuming he would have been found or sought out help later on down the road. According to my boy and his mate, the kid's been living out in the woods for a few weeks. Dorian scratched the back of his head as he said this. They said that they think he's been living off of wild berries, creek, and river water. And they say they found some empty cans they think had food in them, but they're not sure how old those are. The lynx nodded at this, letting out a sigh. That matches what I've seen so far, but there is something else that I need to inform you of.
What is it, Lyle?
Dorian said, his ears perking up. Dr. Katzen paused as though he wasn't sure of just how to proceed. There is evidence that this child suffered past abuse. Dorian frowned at that, not that he was surprised. The way Marcus kept flinching and shrinking back from physical contact was a big indicator. There are some scars on the back of his paws, and, well, a very extensive series of scars across his back. Lyle opened a folder he was holding and showed it to Dorian. It contained some pictures on the back of the boy's hands, showing the faded raised skin, and a large picture of his back. Dorian saw these bright pink and significantly fresh scars crisscrossing and nearly covering the entirety of his back.
Do you have any idea as to what caused this?
Dorian asked, already knowing that what he was seeing was not caused by an accident. It's possible a knife of some kind, but I would put my money on some kind of switch or a whip. Neither male said anything for a moment. I've already called and informed Child Protective Services. However, since it seems we're dealing with a potentially undiscovered species, researcher to confirm sentience is being dispatched first. Dorian snorted at that, but nodded.
I'm pretty sure we can go ahead and agree that he's sentient. One of my granddaughters is actually the same species as that boy in there. She doesn't know what her species is, but she is sentient, that's for sure. All right, then. I'd like to speak to him, if he's currently up for it.
Lyle smiled and nodded at that. He's been all stitched up and is currently awake, so go right ahead, Sheriff. Dorian thanked the lynx before heading down to the nearby hall to the room number he'd been given. He entered the hospital room with a calm smile on his muzzle. He saw Marcus sitting up in his bed, hooked up to an IV. He took note of how the boy tensed up when he entered, but chose not to address it. Marcus was looking noticeably better now that he was no longer filthy, and the simple light blue hospital scrubs were an improvement over his torn and dirty clothes.
How are you feeling, Marcus?
Better. The nurse let me go take a shower. Sir, Marcus said. The boy watched Dorian's every move as the law wolf pulled up a chair and took a seat.
If you'd like, you can just call me Dorian.
Okay, Dorian, Marcus said, his voice not as raspy as it had been.
All right. Now that we've established that I ain't gonna hurt you,
Dorian said with a gentle smile as he leaned forward a little in his chair.
How about we have a little talk?
Marcus nervously nodded towards the white wolf before looking back down at his hands as he was sitting cross-legged on the hospital bed, resting them in his lap.
Let's start with something easy. You said your name was Marcus. How about your last name?
Wolfram, Marcus said with a stuttered whisper. Dorian nodded and filed the name away.
Is that Wolfram with an O or two F's? Can y'all spell it?
WULFRAM, Marcus spelled out, looking uncomfortable as he did so.
All right, this is good,
he said in a reassuring voice.
And how old are you, Marcus?
Marcus looked up at the ceiling before saying,
18.
in an obviously fake deep voice. Dorian frowned and leaned back in his seat, the law wolf folding his arms, staring at Marcus.
Marcus, I want to help you, but you're doing yourself no favors lying to me. This nose of mine can smell bullshit, so how about we try that again?
Marcus trembled a little and shrank back in on himself for a moment. I meant to say that I just turned 18, he said. Dorian just continued to stare at the boy, his expression unchanged. Well,
I mean, I will be turning 18 in a few days. Marcus tried, noticing the wolf still staring at him with that same, almost disappointed expression. Marcus gulped. Okay, I'm 16, Marcus said, his false, deep voice lightening. Seeing the still unamused expression on Dorian's muzzle, Marcus started to sweat a little. 15? Marcus tried. It sounded more like a question than a statement. After many years as an officer, Dorian knew how to interrogate and watched as the boy before him slumped his shoulders and hung his head. I just turned 12, Marcus said miserably. Dorian smiled a little at getting the truth out of the boy and started to perk right back up. There we go, Dorian said before his smile vanished, seeing silent tears start to trail their way down the strange young mammal's furless cheeks. Please, don't put me in the system, Marcus pleaded in a whisper, once more briefly looking up into Dorian's eyes. Dorian saw how visibly afraid Marcus was and relaxed his posture. Hey now, we're just talking here. That's all. You're not in any trouble, Dorian said soothingly, reaching out to rest a paw on the boy's shoulder, noticing him once again flinch away from physical contact, making another mental note about it. Please, Marcus asked again, looking back down at his hands. I know what happens to kids in the system. I'll be the only one of... Please, just let me go. Marcus, Dorian said after a momentary pause. Please look at me. Dorian waited while the boy took a few deep breaths to try and compose himself, and slowly came to look at the white wolf in his eyes. I can't do that. You're a miner and you're all by yourself. You're living out in the woods, injured and sick. Marcus slumped his shoulders, looking defeated once again. Dorian felt a twinge at the sight. Look, I promise you that I ain't about to let anything happen to you, okay? I understand and know that you might not believe me right now, but you're not gonna be alone anymore, understood? Marcus looked at him in momentary confusion before swallowing a lump in his throat and nodding, not really sure what to believe. Now, maybe we can move on to some questions about your parents. Dorian saw how Marcus immediately tensed up, his breathing becoming rapid. Okay, we can table that for another time, Dorian offered in a soft tone. He waited while Marcus started to calm down, but could still see a slight tremble in the boy. Just then, there was knocking at the door, which was quickly opened. In strode an older deer wearing a lab coat, carrying a small briefcase. Behind him trailed Zack and Vanna. The sight of all these additional mammals caused a slight whimper to escape from Marcus's throat. Can I help you? Dorian asked with a frown. Andrew Dearborn, head of the Civilized Mammalian Research Center. We were informed of a potentially newly discovered species, and I am here to determine if that is indeed the case, and to determine sentience and report my findings, he briskly said, walking over to the bed, setting his briefcase down on a nearby bedside table. You certainly got here awful fast, Dorian said, not liking this sudden intrusion as he was building rapport with a now more clearly agitated Marcus, who had scooted back from the bed. We have an office in the southern Midlands, and the video and pictures sent have helped expedite the process. Of course, this could be yet another potential prank or false alarm, he said, putting latex gloves over his hooves. He then brought out a clipboard and pen. All right, I have already collected a sample of his blood and hair collected by the medical staff here, along with a copy of its medical report. As the deer scribbled notes down on his clipboard, started to check boxes as he walked around the bed, a chord was struck by Dorian, Zack, and Vanna simultaneously. Did he just call him it? Dearborn leaned in close, looking at Marcus over his glasses. Interesting. Such a lack of fur. Is it some sort of disease? Does your species share? Huh? No. Very interesting. Paw for covered radio, but thumbs, so that's a plus. Then, without warning, the deer leaned forward and opened Marcus's mouth with one hoof, shining a flashlight into his mouth with the other, the clipboard tucked under an arm. Omnivore based on the tooth structure. The mark of an indecisive species. Well, one cannot expect all sentient mammals to be fully evolved. Still. He let go, and Marcus curled up a bit, breathing faster. You're scaring the boy, Zack said with a low growl. Do you speak any Manglish? He asked very loudly and very slowly, completely ignoring the unamused deputy. Marcus squeaked and scooted back, flinching away and nodding. Yes, sir. He then turned to the assembled hunters. And no one here has spent any time coaching its basic responses. That would invalidate my response. And results. Zack answered, him. Coaching him and no. I'll make no sex determination until I've done a full body inspection, Dearborn said, readjusting his latex gloves. At that, Dorian let out a growl of his own. Like hell you are. If one of your hooves ventures south from that boy's belt, you'll be hanging from your stethoscope, Dorian said, inserting himself between the bed and the now flummoxed deer. But my research, he protested to an uncaring Dorian. Y'all were sent here to determine if a new species had been found and if they're sentient, Dorian said, stepping forward. Now, you've already interviewed the boy, you've taken your notes, and you have your samples. But, Dearborn said, backing up a step for each step Dorian took towards him. Finally, he swallowed a lump in his throat and found his briefcase shoved into his hooves. Very well, but based on the minimum standards provided, it is my determination that the child in question is indeed sentient, and visually of a species that I myself have never encountered or read about before. Further study of the samples will prove or deny that, but I still don't know the species' name. Humans, came a quiet voice. All turned toward Marcus, who was still curled up a bit and looking in their directions. Humans. Pronounced humans. That's what we call ourselves. Dearborn scribbled that down and made his way out the door. Dorian offered Marcus a smile, and the boy started to uncurl a bit. Inwardly, the older law wolf breathed a sigh of relief. Dorian took a few more minutes, taking a seat back in the chair and further helping Marcus to calm down. It wasn't long after Zack and Vanna left the room that Marcus let out a big yawn. I think that it's about time that you got yourself some rest, Marcus. Okay. Thank you, sir. Dorian, Marcus said, clearly sleepy. You're welcome, son. Get some shut-eye, Dorian said softly. He didn't need to tell the boy twice, as when he made it to the door, he could hear light snoring coming from the bed behind him. He closed the door behind him and stood there, an idea coming to him. He walked out to the waiting room and saw Yuri sitting next to Ulrich, glaring at him.
Dorian noticed Ada, Honey, and Audrey chatting about something in hushed whispers, while Vanna sat nearby next to her mate, looking to him as he entered the room.
He's gonna be just fine, and right now he's getting some sleep. But, Zach, can I have a word with you?
Zack nodded and stood up, looking confused, like just about everyone else, and followed his father down another hall. Once they were in an empty hospital room is when Dorian decided to start.
Zach, do you think that you and Vanna would be willing to become legal foster parents to Marcus?
The older law wolf asked, looking at his son, who took a moment to process just what was being asked. Wait, what? Pa, what about you and Ma? Y'all got plenty of space up the ranch.
Well, we're planning on making some changes, actually. A pup like Marcus needs some stability, and I can't think of anyone more stable than you and Vanna.
Dorian explained. Changes? Zack asked, confused, before deciding to table his curiosity for the time being. But, Pa, me and Vanna have talked over adopting, sure. But we've been thinking that we prefer either a wolf pup or a tiger cub, so we can relate more easily. I mean, we don't know anything much about these humans.
I know that what I'm asking you ain't easy, or something to decide on the fly. But that pup in there doesn't deserve to be poked and prodded and shuffled from place to place. You saw how terrified he was, convinced that anyone who saw him was gonna hurt him. The last thing he needs in his life is any kind of confirmation of that belief. Please, just think it over, son.
Dorian implored. Zack looked down at his ringing paws, before looking up into his father's eyes. He let out a slight whine before nodding. I'll discuss it with Vanna, Pa, Zack said. Dorian nodded and lightly smiled, watching his son walk down the hall. Dorian waited for him to disappear around the corner before pulling out his phone. He tapped on its face before holding it up to his ear.
Hey, Xavier. I know that this is your and Malcolm's vacation, but your brother and sister-in-law could really use your help. They're gonna become foster parents to the pup we found in the woods,
Dorian said, a smirk on his muzzle. A short time later. What? Vanna exclaimed. She and Zack were currently in the parking lot of the hospital for their private talk. But what about Papa and Mama Hunter? Surely they have plenty of room. What with raising 7 pups already? Boss said that they're making changes to the ranch, Zack said sheepishly. Goofball. We've already discussed having kids and decided on one that's a species we're familiar with. I know, kitten, but don't forget that we also ultimately agreed we just want kids, period. Zack offered. There's a free one right there. Zack. Vanna rolled her eyes before looking down at her mate. He's a young cub, not a donut. I know, kitten, but Paul was right. That pup in there needs some stability, and we can give that to him. Also, as foster parents, we can use this as a sort of trial run for being parents. But he was so scared of us. Of me, Vanna said sadly. He was scared of everybody. But we can show him that he doesn't need to be afraid. Especially of a big orange and black striped marshmallow like you. Vanna blushed and let out a happy chuff. Still. Plus, as we help him learn to open up, we can learn more about his species and their culture. Imagine how much we can help Lily, Zack said, knowing he had hit a bullseye. The mention of her youngest niece was enough to sway the usually stoic tigress. It briefly brought back the night of the storm, and with it a range of emotions. Well, with Papa and Mama Hunter so close, we could have help with any parenting issues that may arise, Vanna said, suddenly finding her arms filled with her excitable mate, whose mouth found hers while his tail blared happily behind him.